Hi, everybody. I'm really delighted that you're all participating tonight. And I'm really thankful to have this opportunity to introduce James Skeet, our featured guest for the second Soil Stories webinar. James, along with his wife Joyce and other collaborators, run Spirit Farm and Covenant Pathways, a nonprofit organization serving the Navajo and Zuni Pueblo communities and our wider community. Spirit Farm is located in Vanderwagen, where James and Joyce live. That's western New Mexico in McKinley County, south of Gallup. Spirit Farm is a demonstration farm, integrating traditional Native American farming and state-of-the-art healthy soil principles. We are very lucky to have James with us on any occasion to share his wisdom. But this is a very poignant time to have James with us. As all of us know, the Navajo community has been devastated by the coronavirus and sadly now has the highest COVID-19 infection rate in the nation. And Covenant Pathways has been helping provide the Navajo and other local communities with vital supplies, as well as seeds and supports. And we really thank you so much for this important work at this difficult time. And on a deeper level, we thank you for your calling to use this challenging moment in history to migrate home, to re-envision, and regenerate a whole new and traditional agriculture and food system, one that focuses on the native way, on local and regional food production, processing and distribution, on direct marketing, on decolonization of the food system, and on healthy soil stewardship, which means more and diverse nutrients, which means healthy land based on biodiversity, which means healthy people and healthy diverse communities. We all know the vital saying, water is life. The soil is also life. Our food is life-giving, and our integrity and teamwork are life-honoring principles. So hopefully all of us, the tribes and the wider society, will seize this moment to work together to restore agriculture and our food economy. In this spirit, I'm really grateful to introduce James Skeet to share his inspiring soil story with us during this pressing time. So James, take it away.
Thanks, Rob. You made me nervous now. I really appreciate this opportunity for the soil folks. And I see, I'm looking through, scrolling down to see all my friends that are out there from Chicago all the way to Rayma, Candy Kitchen. Shout out to you guys, to Melissa down in Las Cruces. And so there's a lot of people involved in our formation. The way we've been looking at things have been redirected, which we will be talking about it this evening, culture and farming. But I do want to say that this is a real interesting development that's taken place. It seems like regenerative farmers and regenerative folks have been swimming upstream for such a long time that now things are changing and we're getting more momentum. So hopefully things will move forward. With that, can you show the first slide there? Are we seeing it yet? Okay, there we go. You got to go back up to the first one. Keep going, keep going. There we go. We started looking at epistemology, you know, how we look at, through what lenses do we look at, through in terms of culture and in terms of worldviews. So we came up with this Indigenous regenerative intelligence. Indigenous basically just means local, homegrown. It's centered around your umbilical cord, as we say in Navajo. It's buried somewhere on your land, so that whether it be in the sheep corral, or where you become a good herder, or it be maybe in the yarn box, so that you become a good weaver. It's indigenous. It's just local. And in New Mexico, we have much to be proud of, because New Mexico has really emulated that indigenous feel. So whoever comes into New Mexico, and if he hangs out long enough, they start eating green chili, start eating indigenous local foods, some oven bread from the indigenous people there. You become attached to the land. My grandfather used to say, Americans will become Americans, true Americans, indigenous people, once they start burying their grandfathers and grandmothers. Regenerative, as we move forward, is really looking at, as Al McCabe at the Learning Center there in Candy Kitchen has really, kind of emulated that for many years. And one of the things he always says is, you start with zero and move up. You start with really nothing. And that's what's happening with our land. Our land is so depleted and so in such sorry condition. Jeff and I have talked about all the topsoil being blown away and hitting a lot of the peaks, the Rocky Mountains, and snow, and it's melting in a much quicker way, and we're getting all these floods downriver. So regenerative is really starting with zero and then moving up. It's a different mindset, which we'll talk about. And the intelligence is much more than just thinking. It's thinking with your heart. Crazy Horse used to say, find a good heart, because not everybody is going to go into battle with you, but find that good heart. So the intelligence has to do with going back to our ancestral roots and our perspectives on things. This is a picture of Canyon de Chelly, the last hogan, deep in the canyon. And if you've ever been to Canyon de Chelly, you'll know how difficult it is to hike in the environment there. This was the furthest hogan that we ran across, and it was as if somebody had just left in the 20s and 30s. There were still some things out on the shelves, different canning jars that were kind of bluish and turquoise in color. There was a saddle outside hanging there. It just was starting to deteriorate. But you look at how the soil was really good, because the Navajos at the time had sheep economy, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about it. So we are looking at healing the soil and healing the soul. That's our website there, covenantpathways.org. If you want more information on some of our writings, we're doing a lot of writing on what we're going to be talking about tonight. Next slide. Boom. Here's my grandma on the corner on the left side, top left. That's my grandma sitting there. And then on the right side is Money Skeet, and that's Mary, his wife. It's my aunt making some fry bread, I think. I'm not sure what that is in there. Because we're nomadic people, we love to cook outside. And then on the bottom left is my mom, incredible artist, weaver. She made a lot of the clothes for Dances with Wolves. Right before her passing, I used to just kind of hold her hands, and it was so callous, very, very callous. And then, of course, my dad was the first Navajo Railroad, Indigenous Railroad supervisor for Santa Fe. And he employed a lot of men. Everybody knows him. All the old railroad men know him, because he was the one that signed them up and translated a lot of the information for them, so that they would have jobs for their families. Next slide. Human history did not begin 8,000 or 10,000 years ago with the invention of agriculture and villages. It began hundreds of thousands of millions of years ago with the origins of the genus Homo. For more than 99% of human history, people have lived in hunter-gatherer bands, totally and intimately involved with other organisms. As language and culture expanded, humans also live with living organisms of diverse kinds as the principal source of metaphors and myth. In short, the brain evolved in a biocentric world, not a machine-regulated world. And that's by Wilson. That's one of my favorite quotes. Next slide. The mindset. What we're dealing with in regenerative agriculture is really a mindset. The mental construct that, you know, it became so entrenched in Europeanism, this kind of mechanical mind, away from the organic mind, what I call indigenous worldview. Humans have separated themselves from their environment, detached from the spiritual and the physical. It became dual Platonic thought, which comes from some of the philosophers' Platonic thought, that Plato's thesis on separating what is perfect, the perfect triangle. To indigenous worldview, reality is interconnectedness with lands and all living things. It really, what it does is it contains ethical and spiritual implications for nature and the balance of earth and sky. We'll talk a little bit more about that. All things possess a living soul or a spiritual essence of experience and feelings. Now, the indigenous science is this system of cosmology, contains strong ethical and spiritual implication for nurturing and sustaining the earth in balance and in harmony. Next slide. Indigenous nature has to balance. Water is sacred. Religion in New Mexico is complex because of the delicate nature of our relationship with Mother Earth. Tribes would use whole landscapes to collect water because water was very sacred. In Navajo, we say "twoti," which means water is divine, it's sacred, it's precious, it's not something to be taken lightly. The microbial sponge, restoring the water cycles with Father Sky, which a lot of our medicine men talk about in their designs of the sand paintings. And then when we came home from boarding school, or when we got exposed to European teachings, Western European thought, our grandfather would chase us out and say, you better bathe in dirt because you want that stuff off of you. So he would force us to bathe in the sand. We had a little sand pile that we'd always hit, you know, and we'd just rub the dirt all over us. Patterns to copy Mother Earth. There are what they call mimicking Mother Nature, or biomimicking. And then the DNA in plants and indigenous people. If you look at it, tribes understood how plants work and how they heal almost simultaneously, not in sharing journals or information. It was a pursuit to really think and dream deep. This deep dreaming we've lost. When you watch television, you get into the story and then pop right there, you pop into a commercial. Things are getting further and further fragmented, and that's what the Hopis, Kikotsiswana, what it means, world gone crazy. The Navajo is the last level of silver stuff and shiny stuff and things that were quick. Relationships weren't there anymore. All things are prophecies made by indigenous people. Next slide. I don't know if you can see the bottom part. It says GMO, and then the other one says organic. This is a collision that's happened with two economic systems. Custer, on the one hand, was a currency-based system. That's why the government was going into tribes to extract gold, silver, to set up the foundation for the currency-based economy. Whereas you notice that Sitting Bull's holding his peace pipe. There was a deep connection with the spiritual and the physical. There was, in fact, it wasn't even separated. So everything that they negotiated or thought or even spoke related to some form of religion, religious accountability, ethical basis. But this here, strong defeat of Custer was the last inkling of a bartering system economy. The horse being the economy that many of these Lakota, the Northern Cheyenne, the Southern Cheyenne, the Chiricahuas, the Comanches, all took this horse nation to a level of an economy. Because before the horse, they were very, very poor people. But the tribe that took on the most Americanness was the Navajos. They took on the pastoral. This is a shout out to you, churros farmers, churros sheep, because the Spaniards introduced the churros. They almost became extinct, but the revitalization of herds have been developed. So we have a lot of churros sheep. So when I go out and herd the sheep out in our area, I'm doing something that is very much a legacy of my grandfathers and my grandmothers. Next slide. I like this quote. Just now, a rock took fright. When it saw me, it escaped by playing dead. Next slide. I want to talk a little bit because my background is NGO social scientist. I develop a lot of things of systems, system migration, general systems model, looking at liberation theology, worked with many different countries before I came back to Gallup. Adaptation, I just want to share with you, adaptation usually involves a change of something, a reaction to a situation, either to return, to move into new situations. For example, a farmer may switch to heat-tolerant crops in response to more severe heat. Whether responsive or anticipatory, adaptation tries to change with the condition to include and develop context and design from within. Adaptation is important to decrease susceptibility to climate impacts or pandemics. It does not challenge the stakeholders, the systems, the structure, and interests that keep systems intact. Adaptation is usually considered positive, impartial acts that allow societies to move forward by conforming with the conditions of climate change or pandemics. Adaptation refers to those vital engagements and strategies that a community or an individual will employ against an existing or anticipated impact of change. Now listen to this last part. Resilience, on the other hand, refers to the ability to bounce back to the original state of normalcy, only a temporary setback. What we've been asking of Indigenous people is to be resilient. We've tried to adapt, but it's the same messed up system on our reservations, the same transferred government, not a transforming government. We've been asked to suffer more and more each and every year. We've been given commodity foods. We've been given foods that are not directly marketed from our own people. We have moved from a sheep economy, which we were once very strong and very regenerative, and we are forced to lower our numbers on our sheep. And now what's happened is we've become a very dependent nation. Next slide. It'll all make sense in this drawing that I have. Transformation, in contrast, and let's think about this. It involves a change from something into something. Transformation may be a response to change. However, it is also possible to initiate transformation that deliberately challenge the very system and structure and behavior and mindset that generates such change in the first place. This involves not only recognizing that humans are an important part of the Earth system, but also understanding that humans do have the capacity to influence the future climate or the future situation. We can address an issue such as climate change or pandemics. We may have to adapt to the ideas that humans are capable of such transformation. We have to take responsibility for these transformations by choice rather than by default. Next slide. Boom, here it is. This is something that I've been working on in terms of cosmology and in terms of regenerative farming. The worldview, which we're talking about, the epistemology and the system. And you see the conventional system is to maintain. It's a mechanical, industrial, conventional farming mindset. It came from Descartes, the philosopher. Francis Bacon picked it up and on into the machinery that took hold of the idea of manifest destiny. Using the mind, and then that's where systemic racism came from, because it then now classified people. Whoever thinks the most, whoever studies the most, has a higher hierarchy. Nature is to be controlled. Time is linear. Currency-based economy, that's the thing that we're dealing with today. Food is the commodity, which is really another way of saying is that our distribution has been disrupted. It's chemistry-based, fertilizers, pesticides, fungicides, production heavy, substantial inputs, dense disturbance on the soil. Now on the right hand, the Sitting Bull side, organic indigenous mindset, all things are sacred. The left side disembowels the soul and the spirit. The right side is the very premise of these systems is based on sacredness. Nature is to be respected and copied. Time is secular. The regenerative economy, we're moving into that. Food is medicine, biology-based, low inputs, minimal disturbance. You see that marginal perspective is what indigenous people have. If you try to talk about resilience and sustainability, you're just trying to prop up the system. Whereas transformation and adaptation is about systems change. It's incremental steps. Okay, next slide. So the lost writings of Archimedes talks about, if you give me a liver long enough and a fulcrum in the right place, I can move the world. But you can't move the world if you're on it. You have to be outside it. And that's all I'm saying is us indigenous people have been outside of this mechanical, linear mindset. And so right now it's our opportunity to move the world. Next slide. Migration, Rob mentioned this a little bit. I have done everything that is required of me. Education, university, corporations. I was empty. My wife and I weren't happy. And one day we decided to farm. And when we started the farm, we realized how we're like preschoolers, just a kid that's learning how to walk. So our migration has been towards the center. Next slide.
James, we have about 2 or 3 minutes before we need to go to questions. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, go to the next slide. We'll skip that. This one right here. This is regenerative farming, has to do with looking at the soil and the microbial sponge. It's looking at the biotic pump, whereas we have very, very hard soil now. And it's just the whole greenhouse effect is taking place. And when I talked to the medicine men, they had this design already in their cosmology. Next slide. So we're just carbon farming. We're putting back carbon drawdown, we're putting carbon back into the soil instead of releasing it. Next slide. These are some of the principles we have: value microbes, feeding microbes, protecting, maximizing diversity. So the thing that pushes this is the transformative adaptation, which we've been doing. Go ahead, next slide. And this is kind of a linear way of looking at it, the 7 steps to regenerative farming from the circles. Next slide. That soil that we made has enough population as the earth, that handful of soil. Next slide. This is our bioreactor. We have recently moved towards the Johnson soup for the fungal. This is more of the carbon. This is one of the reservations that helped develop this, grandmas and little kids. Next slide. Thermal composting. And do the next slide. Are we hung up there? These are the woody greens and the party foods that we use, the percentages, the temperature, the nutrient cycling that has to take place. That we're teaching, adding new Navajo words on what protozoas are, what their roles are, nematodes, all this to create, because the plant is like the mouth to the earth. And what it draws and eats goes down into the soil. Next slide. So this is a quote from Crowbelly. The Great Spirit has given the white man great foresightedness. He sees everything at a distance, and his mind invents and makes the most extraordinary things. But the red man has been made short-sighted. He sees only what is close around him and knows nothing except what his father knew. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Jeff?
Great. Thank you, James. That was excellent. I appreciate that. I have been collecting questions that have been on the chat line, and so maybe I'll reference those for you to answer. I might ask if the person that sent it would just ask him directly of James. So the first person was Mark, and he made the comment, one truth of many. So do you want to say anything more about that, Mark?
Well, since there are many religions, and you started with a lot of religious talk as if it were fact, I assume you believe it is fact? Are you presenting it as fact?
The reason why I didn't have a lot of numbers, reductionist perspective, this is more of the storytelling. You're telling a story.
Good. Good. Okay. Is that good, Mark?
Yeah.
Okay. Then Gregory Corning, you had a question. Would you like to ask that? Or I can remind it. You said, I would like to know the history of how white people, European Americans and all, got so lost. When and how did we lose our way and lose our souls?
If we go back to that drawing of Archimedes' lost writings, it's hard to, when you're so subjective to your own culture, when it teaches you about this way of life, it's hard to look from outside in. So what's happening is that we've kind of lost our way because we've been so subjected. I didn't learn how to read until 7th grade. But in that formative years of not knowing how to read, I heard stories from my grandfather. I heard stories from my mom. It was a different mindset, a different perspective that helped me create my worldview. So when I did learn how to read, I just tackled everything on. So, and that is really a pendulum. What I was showing you about the epistemology is really a pendulum. We need both, you know. But I think we've slid off the edge to one side too much, and what we need to do is flow back to the middle.
Great, thank you. The next one is from Mark again. How does the epistemology explain the facts of nearly 40% of Navajo don't have a tap or toilet at home?
Yeah, this is kind of the bottom line. What good are the stories if we have such great needs in the Navajo community?
I'm not sure how to answer that question. I'm not sure what that question, you know, if you can break it down for me.
Well, one of the things we're seeing as a result of the isolation for COVID-19 is that they don't even have enough water to wash their hands. So there's a great need in the community. Is the Navajo people allowing others to bring water, to establish a permanent water system? This epistemology sounds like great stories, but
Yeah.
is it really effective?
I'm not sure about the last comment, but let me tackle on what the pandemic has done is expose the inequities. And we'll see that more and more. More poor people are going to get this virus that's going around. Crazy Horse once said, you know, we don't fear the white man. We don't fear their guns. What we fear is their diseases. So we have tried very hard to adapt to this way of looking at the world, and things haven't really worked for us. So now's the time to really go back to the history and make it our future. We have to begin to think creatively. We have to break down this colonization, which has really removed our imagination to have that future.
I'd like to add a little bit more too, if you don't mind, James. I worked out in the former Bennett Freeze part of Navajo Nation, which is around Flagstaff and Tuba City. And there was a government decree for 62 years that said no water, no electricity, no homes, no roads, no development could happen. And that was something the federal government imposed on the people out there. So they were not allowed to develop water, to have electricity. There were power lines going over the top of their heads from coal factories that were, you know, producing power. They were not allowed to tap into that electricity. So that's another piece that's part of that story that's pretty challenging, so that I know of. So yeah, thank you. Kendra Chamberlain, she's got two questions. One, she says, hi, James, thank you for the great presentation. How do systems change, bottom up or top down, slowly or all at once? And there's a second question, which is also, would it be possible to get a copy of the slideshow for future reference? So two areas right there.
Sure, you can have whatever copies I have. These are some things that are kind of in the works. I have to break it down from some other presentations that I've done. But in regards to your first question, we really, the hierarchy was created by more of a mechanical mindset, corporations, but in recent times, what's happening is that, you know, there's an equalizing factor that's involved, but either by environment or conditions. We're becoming global individuals. We've come into a global family, so to speak. And we have to learn how to go forward. And that's the thing that I see in terms of our epistemology and how we look at things, and also what that transformative adaptation is going to take. And it's going to take sequences. On our farm, we started with conventional farming, and we didn't get very far. So we had to go into some of the biology, the thermal composting, amending the soil. And we've been able to grow just about anything, which now we have a year's supply of meat and food. And we've been prepared for this. So people are asking us, how's this pandemic affected us? I hate to say this, but it hasn't. We've been able to establish that. And that's part of the resiliency and support systems that we have. We can now begin to redistribute some of the wealth into the community, and which is a wonderful thing, because in Navajo culture, if you become materialistic and you gain a lot of things, or money, whatever, they call you a witch, because a witch controls things. So in order to not be called a witch, you have to give away, do the giveaways, you know, to redistribute the wealth into the community.
Good. All right. Next one is just a reiteration from Ian Colburn. Will these slides be available after the presentation for download? So there's that. Samuel, how can we get in contact with James?
Look on our website, covenantpathways.org.
Great.
And our email is covenantpathways39@msn.com.
Very good. Thank you. Did everybody get that? Does anybody need that again? All right. Brent Van Dyke, how do we feed 7 billion world population during transition to soil health?
We don't. That's that whole false assumption that we're here to feed the world. Part of the thing that we're doing is direct marketing and getting people educated on reattaching to local foods, so that they can reconnect. Gardeners that can have their community become a source to their community. So changes are happening, whether we like it or not.
Good. Whoops. All right, James. And then I see Isabel put for everyone to see on the chat box James's email and the website, so you can catch that on the, if you hadn't written that down or whatever, you can catch it there. Let's see, Maury Hensley, sorry. Thanks for the presentation. Yes?
If people want to speak instead of you reading, that we can do that.
Okay. Yeah, so if Maury, if you want to talk about what your question is.
Sure. Thanks so much again for your presentation, James. I wondered if you can share a little bit more about your strategy for managing invasive species, particularly plant species, but I guess generally as well, in sort of also managing for healthy soil, and trying to keep the soil covered, and trying to keep living root and things like that. How can you sort of do that and still transition to more native species in a regenerative way? Thanks so much.
Yeah, there's so much that we're doing on the farm here, along with other gardeners and other farmers. The whole concept of hunter and gatherer farming is just a narrow perspective. A lot of the gathering that Indigenous people did was they sourced into what grew naturally and what we call wild. A lot of those first succession of invasive species have high nutrient density. I hate to say this, but produce and what we grow has less. So we've been going back and using my mom's technique of eating a lot of the foods that are Indigenous people, because we're nomadic. So we know a lot of the foods that are out there, and our elders know that. And so we try to use a lot of those plants that we call invasive species. And if you work with the compost, the more your soil gets healthier, the less so-called weeds. The second succession is grasses, and on down the line. So there's successions. And so amending the soil really helps remove a lot of the Russian thistles, the mustard weed, the what do they call those plants that kind of wind themselves all across the ground, which to me the sheep love.
Nice. Claudia, would you like to? Oh, go ahead. Yes.
Sure. Hi. Thank you.
Can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Let me.
I can hear you.
Let's get Claudia first, and then I'll take the
Okay.
question. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, James. This has really been very interesting. I did a doctoral dissertation on adaptation and regeneration, and this is just wonderful. So do you think COVID right now, what we're seeing, is this an opportunity for us to recalibrate as a society and rethink our values, as you're saying?
Yeah, I love that word, recalibrate. Yes, I do think right now an Indigenous voices are needed, and they're important. They're voices from the margins, whether it be a feminist voice, people of color. We have some, some to add to what's going on, to the ecological travesty that's going on. Mother Nature is out of balance, and we have known for eons and eons, generations after generations. We learn to adapt, and then we also learn how to be transformative in sequence. One of the things that I can give you an example of that transformative adaptation is fry bread. It's a prison food, flour and grease and all that. But as a transformative mechanism, how do we make that fry bread highly nutritional? So those are some thoughts that I have.
You broke up a little bit there, James, at the very end.
Well, you heard the fry bread being nutritional, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you got me hungry already.
Okay, sorry.
Thank you, James.
Yeah,
all right.
You're welcome.
Good. So it says iPad, but would you like to share your question or comment?
Yeah, James, buenos dias. This is Reuben and Kelly Cedeño from Cerritos. We've been working with you on your advice for our composting, and we saw Regeneration. How are you?
We're doing good. How you all folks doing?
We have a question. Doing good. We're following your ideas on the composting. We're setting our composting for next year. But we do have a question to talk to us about comparing and contrasting the tarp over the compost or shade cloth over the compost. Can you talk to us a little bit? What's the advantage and disadvantage of each one?
Finally, a very practical question. The one thing that we have to understand in New Mexico is things dry out so fast. So what you're doing in that compost is creating an environment where these little bugs can reproduce. And so you got to really smell the soil, look at the soil, kind of reattach yourself, your senses to what's going on in that pile. My wife uses the microscope. I use my nose. My nose is really good. I can tell when compost is doing well. So if it smells stinky, take that tarp off. It can be, shade cloth, whatever. But if you have more oxygen working throughout the pile, the better.
Very good.
Okay. So are you recommending that we stay with the shade cloth?
Yeah, if it's not stinky and if it's breaking down real well, yeah, stick with it.
Okay. Thank
Great.
you. We'll
Good.
be talking to you soon, James.
Yep.
Very good. Samuel, do you want to say anything more about your comment?
Hello, James. I really enjoyed your talk.
Thank you.
I was just putting my perspective in there in the chat. I'm from Milwaukee, Pueblo, and I'm learning.
Oh, wonderful.
I'm beginning to learn about traditional farming practices, restoring soil, and things like that. And I was just putting in the chat that the reason for there maybe not being like housing or water or electricity on Navajo Nation isn't because of an inadequacy in the stories, but because of it's just a result of colonization.
Yes.
But when you go back to the stories, you go back to the way people lived before colonization and how those systems were more about what you're talking about.
Yeah. Appreciate it.
Good.
And can I make a comment, Samuel? The one thing about Indigenous people is that we're so close. It just, you know, it's like what we're doing is tickling the DNA in us to want to farm again and to build that relationship. So it doesn't take very long for Indigenous urban dwellers that have been colonized. It's that 10% that they haven't been colonized, that if you tickle their DNA, they go right back into the way their ancient forebears used to be. That's exciting.
Yeah, that's good. Sylvia, you had a question. And you're on mute. If I can't really see you, but you might be on mute, or maybe I could just ask the question. And that's, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you see
Great.
me?
Yes, thank
Yeah,
you.
we can see you.
Hi there. I appreciate all that you're doing. Would you discuss the importance of song, music, dance, the feast
Oh, man.
into the life of making a resilient fabric of life? I can't imagine farming without doing that.
Yes.
I mean, it's
Sylvia, yes. I didn't talk about it here, but because of time constraints, when the cosmology, once you begin to understand the mechanisms of the reattachment, the migration back to center, then comes out the songs and the dances to emulate the ceremonies, to celebrate, to move into a deeper relationship with Father Sky, Mother Earth. All those are really key things. That's where the regenerative farmers have not gone yet. We're still very linear. So I really appreciate that question.
Oh, thank you. I think that's a really great place to be. I think in this healing, that's the healing place to be.
Yes. Yes.
Nice.
Amen.
Thank you. So that's all the questions.
I have another question.
That were written.
I have another question.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Hey, James, it's Reuben again. It just dawned on me. I had another question. Every year every year I collect my ashes from the kiva, and I'm wondering what is the percentage or the amount that I should put in the compost of my ashes?
You know, Reuben,
Or
we're
should
just
I
now
just
beginning to. No. We're just now beginning to put ash, which is new trace minerals, into the compost. There's some experimentations that we're doing with some of the compost piles where we're putting a lot of our wood ash and different ashes into the compost itself, which is connected to that idea of trace minerals. The problem that we're having, the sickness that we're having among our Indigenous people is because we don't have a lot of those trace minerals. There are folks that are doing major studies on that, you know, even going back to ancient ground, you know, where the dinosaurs all died, and there's some trace minerals in there that they're using for healing. So there is a real connection of healing that we're just now connecting. So what you're doing is something that's innate in you, something that it's tickling that your DNA. So what it's telling you is that maybe you need to take some of the kiva ash and putting it on your compost pile, putting it on your farm. Do it.
Okay, thank you.
We're close to the time to close. Is there any last question that anybody'd like to ask James while he's here? Just you can go ahead and ask it if you'd like. Okay. And so if you were going to ask a question and you forgot to unmute your thing, go ahead and unmute that. But I'm going to turn it over to Christina to go ahead and close. And first, I might ask if, James, you have any last comments you'd like to say before we close for the evening?
Yeah, to reiterate what I said earlier, and to the gentleman, I forget his name, I think it was Mark. You know, it's something that is happening to our indigenous people all across. I like what the Lakota Nation did is they shut everything down quickly. With the Navajo Nation, what it's doing is it's showing the levels of nutrient levels of our foods, which is unable to fight off a lot of this infections. I'm sure there's going to be more studies that come out, but the one thing we're very concerned about is that we have been aware of pandemics historically, and we'll bounce back from this. We're such wonderful warriors and people that bring so much hope. And what we're seeing now is the haves and have-nots surfacing. We're seeing the inadequacies and the inequalities surfacing. But it's really what we do. We become a global family, and we need to continue to move forward on some of those ideas.
Very good. Thank you, James. Christina, would you like to go ahead and close for the evening?
Thank you. And thank you all for being here. We're thrilled at the number of you who chose to participate this evening and take time out of your day. I'm going to announce our next Soil Stories that will be with Dee Dee Pursehouse, June the 16th, same time as this evening, 5:30. Dee Dee is a friend of ours who is doing amazing work out of Vermont and all over the world. She's the author of 2 publications, one called The Ecology of Care, and the other, Understanding Soil Health and Watershed Function, is a curriculum that is really useful. She is currently doing a lot of work in India with regenerative farming there, which is really interesting. So we have a lot that she can share about. You can go to her website if you like and see more about her, ddpursehouse.com. She also runs the Land and Leadership Institute, which is an educational activity that offers classes on a sliding scale and sometimes free. So we are really excited that Dee Dee is going to be joining us on the 16th to talk with us about her soil story. Have a good evening, all.
Good.
Thank you so much, James and everybody. Thank you for sharing your soil story.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Brent.
Bye.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.